whatever. Part 2, study sesh number 45. Hello. All right. So, would you had something about the test? Oh yeah. The design, yeah. All the teachers the proctors want it to take the whole time because then if students are sitting around being done with the test, then they don't like students are prone to misbehave. So the goal of the teacher is to make most of the finals last most of the time at least. So mine, I think I've given you an estimate of time on each question. And the first one, I think I said like 20-ish minutes or 25-ish minutes. And so I want you guys to kind of pay attention to the clock. And the middle one, the dialogue, is the most I think I said 40 minutes for that, and then the last one, which is like the one-pager essay kind of thing, I think I said 20-ish minutes or something. So roughly it's 90 minutes. So yeah, I'm not worried about you guys having too much time being done. I'm worried about like. Something's going on. So the first question, it's like there's 5 parts to it, and it's like multiple sentence answers. That should be pretty straightforward. That's more like there's not that much thinking involved in that one. Yeah. So is Alexander involved on there? Yeah, good question. Is Alexander the Great on there? No. I kind of forgot about Alexander the Great until you just mentioned him. I think. Yeah, shoot. No Alexander the Great. I should have. That's my fault. Yeah, I'm trying to decide. I feel like I should have. Partly, I don't know that much about Alexander the Great. Like I know the basics, but the more I learn about somebody, the more interesting they become, and then the more I talk about it in class. And I don't know that much about Alexander the Great. I guess. Yeah. Yeah. So Augustine, love, honor. The backdrop to Augustine is the sack of Rome. So he writes this massive book that I finally read last year for the first time. It's 1,000 pages, called The City of God. I think it takes him like 17 years to write it or something like that. And the Goths are the northern kind of European are coming down and invading various parts of Italy. And so in 410, they sack Rome. And Rome was the eternal city. It had been around for 1,000 years, pops into my mind. I'm trying to think if that's right, but that probably is about right. Like it had been around for 1,000 years. And people like thought that it couldn't fall, like it was invincible. And it falls, like it gets sacked and they destroy it, except for the Christian temples, if you remember, right? And Augustine uses that as evidence that that like deep in the heart of Rome, like what really the Christianity is what will save it. But Rome gets sacked, and recently, since it's 410 AD, you might recall this ties together some of the other stuff. There's these edicts of Milan and Edict of Thessalonica in 313 and 380. So 100 years ago, 50 years ago, Christianity is declared like this is the official religion. And then Rome falls. And so a lot of the non-Christian Romans are like, you know why Rome fell? It's because we gave up the pagan gods and we started worshiping the one Christian God. So the Roman gods are pissed at us. And so Augustine writes the City of God. That's why he writes the City of God, is to show that Rome didn't fall because of the Christian gods and that actually its pagan gods have never helped out Rome. And one of the key contrasts he makes, is between the City of God and the City of Men. And there's a couple ways you can articulate the City of God and the City of Men. City of God is marked by love of God, and the City of Men is marked by love of self. And love of self is also the desire for power, or libido dominandi, the drive for dominance. And so if you're in the City of Men, you love yourself, and you can't help but love yourself. Augustine thinks this is, we haven't talked on over this, but Augustine thinks this is because of Adam's sin, because Adam chose a lesser good other than God. We now inevitably choose lower goods, and we love all the wrong things, and we can't help but love all the wrong things. And so we love ourselves so much that we desire to dominate others, and that denotes part of the City of Men. City of God is love of God. Now, honor and humility come into that because the City of Men is marked by the drive for honor. And honor is really kind of just self-love anyway, right? Like, if you want glory and honor, it's kind of loving yourself. And so Augustine says that marks the City of Men, is the desire for glory and honor. And he shows that marks the very, very beginnings of Rome. And the way they think of the very beginnings of Rome is back, for Augustine, about 1,000 years earlier, in 510-ish, I think, BCE, 510 BCE, when the Romans first kicked out their king. And so there was a king called Tarquin the Proud, and the Romans, and this is the story of the rape of Lucretia. And Tarquin the Proud, his son Sextus Tarquinius rapes Lucretia, and she stabs herself and kills herself to basically defend her honor. And Augustine points to this founding story. It would be kind of like Um, trying to mute even again here. I don't know. So the story of the rape of Lucretia would be the July 4th story that we tell ourselves on July 4th. You know, like we overthrew England. And same thing for the rape of Lucretia. That's when the Romans kicked out a king and said, we will never have a king again. But Augustine's point is that foundational moment when the Roman Republic is born, that's rooted in self-love, libido dominandi, or the drive for honor. That Lucretia is really just seeking honor, and that Rome is founded on the drive for honor. And he says that's a bad foundation. Instead, a better foundation is the foundation of Christ, which is humility. And so he points out women in early Christianity who are raped, just like Lucretia, but who don't commit suicide because they're trying to follow Jesus and kind of accept suffering the way Jesus did. And so that's his kind of distinction: city of God versus city of men. Yeah. So Plato and the allegory of the cave. Plato is one. So these are philosophers of ancient Greece, and the philosophers of ancient Greece are Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. And Plato's allegory. So the overall part of it is, right, there's these prisoners that are tied up to a wall, or they're tied up and they look at a wall, and there's flames behind them, and those are casting shadows on the wall, but they think the shadows are the real light. And then behind them, carts and animals and objects are paraded, and then they're displayed on the wall, but just their shadows are displayed. You know, so the shadow of a horse is on the wall, and they think that's a real horse. And then one person somehow escapes from the cave and goes outside, and is blinded by the light at first, but then he sees like real horses, or he sees the sun. And the contrast Plato's trying to make is between the sun as the true light and the shadows of the cave, and how different that is. Or better, like the shadow of a horse and a real horse. And some people interpret that as just like, well, there's more to life than you think. But Plato, the whole point of the allegory of the cave is that there are two worlds. There are two worlds. And one is the world of sense experience, the world of matter, the world of physicality, the world of the five senses. And the other is the invisible world. It's immaterial, it's eternal, it never changes. It's the world of being and pure existence, like it's not becoming, where things are developing. And the world outside the cave is the world of the forms. The world inside the cave is the world of shadows, but it's the physical, material world. The cave is the physical, material world. And Plato thinks that most of us live in the physical, material world. And so the point isn't for Plato like, oh, I should just kind of try and think differently. His point is that if you look around this classroom and outside at the mountains and at the sun and at the waves, like that's not the realist world. The most real world is the world of the forms. And this world is a bunch of copies of the true world of the forms. And so one example is horses. So there's all sorts of different types of horses. And Plato says, well, those horses are all copies of kind of the one true horse that every horse is like a copy of. Or beauty. You go to the checkout stands at this grocery store and there's all the celebrity magazines and there's different people, right, that are all beautiful usually. And I can't think of anybody now, but the prince's new fiance, right? Or is her name Megan? You don't know? Right, so one of the princes is dating some new girl, and so she's beautiful, and then I don't know, Daisy Ridley from Star Wars and Zac Efron, and all these people are beautiful, but they are really just copies of the true beauty in the world of the forms. And that true beauty has always existed. It never changes, but you can't ever get to it with your five senses. So if you think that Daisy Ridley and Zac Efron and Joe Jonas or whatever are like that, you're like, wow, those people are so beautiful. If you think that's all there is to beauty, then you're still in the cave. And you're not out of the cave, because so in the same way that the shadow of the horse is nothing compared to a real horse, Joe Jonas and Kate Upton and Emma Watson and Zac Efron, they're shadows on a wall compared to the true beauty that's outside the cave. But you can't access that with your five senses. You have to access it through contemplating it and thinking about it. And like thinking about what does a beautiful male Hollywood celebrity have in common with a beautiful female Hollywood celebrity, have in common with a beautiful sunset, have in common with a rainbow. All of those are beauty, right? And so those are all examples of physical beauty. What do they all share that's the eternal beauty? And that's the form of beauty. That's outside the cave. So it's physical versus immaterial. And you can't get outside the cave by walking. You get outside the cave by using your reason to think about those truths. Similar to the whole triangle thing. You've never seen a perfect triangle. You can't see a perfect triangle with your five senses. You can contemplate the perfect triangle. So that's the gist of it. But big idea, two worlds. And this world is not even close to the most real thing. Oh, yeah, Eratosthenes and the circumference. So let me screen share this. So you kind of, well, so let me go to the, this is in Unit 2, Ancient Greece, Eratosthenes. So there's definitely a, something online for this. Maybe I'll just download this. Yeah, so my drawings are not as good as so I'm gonna do it on here. Show it on here. Eratosthenes. That is, should be coming up here, I know. Oh, there's the dummy. So the thing about this broadcast, like what I was going to do is try and tell you like where, like what time to locate this. We can look at it later, I guess. Are you on the, because you could probably look at my sheet right now, or you could actually just look at the Eratosthenes sheet. I just downloaded that. So where should I? Eratosthenes is Greece. Hey. I know, it's coming, it's like ebbs and flows. And so Eratosthenes, let me see. Are you guys looking at all at Eratosthenes right now?
Wait, is it just go like red?
I don't know, actually. Just look for people's names that look familiar to you. So Eratosthenes, he's a librarian at the Library of Alexandria, and he reads the story of an account at the city of Syene that says that at noon on a certain day in the summer, there's no shadow at noon. The sun shines straight down into the wells. If there's a stick at noon at that day, there's no shadow whatsoever. And so he's curious if on that same day in Alexandria, there is a shadow. And it turns out there is. And so he asks, what could it mean that there's no shadow on a stick at one part of the earth, but there is a shadow on another part of the earth? And I'll stop the screen share, I think, and draw it after all, even though I suck at drawing. See you, Sammy?
Good luck, guys.
Okay, let's see if it works on the board here. So his so the big thing is that the rays of the earth, the rays of the sun are so far away as to be parallel. And so if this is a stick or if it's like a well, it shines straight down into the bottom, no shadow. But you can see here, and so the trick about this drawing is this has to be perpendicular and this has to be perpendicular. So here come the parallel rays. And so there would be a ray coming down, a ray coming down. It's totally curved. And this makes a triangle. And ultimately, if you extend these, what you end up doing is you make two angles here. And if you know this distance, you know that this is a fraction. This is a fraction of the Earth's circumference. So if you could figure out this part of the pizza, you know that all the way around is 360 degrees. Why are these angles equal? Alternate interior. So alternate interior angle of both of those. And so I'll always, this angle is always given to you. So if you know this angle, and you can figure this out basically by trig, like you just measure this shadow. And so you create a triangle, and based on knowing this triangle, you can figure out that angle, and as a result, you know this angle. And so you know this part, you know this size of the pizza. And if you know this part of the pizza, and you know the whole pizza, which is 360 degrees, you can figure out the circumference of the Earth. The big idea, two cities, one casts a shadow, one doesn't cast a shadow, and this this triangle up here, you solve that triangle. And you have to use trigonometry to solve that, but I always gave you that angle. But knowing this angle helps you figure out that angle because they're the exact same. It's the first Eratosthenes question we've had. And so why, any recollection, why did we do Eratosthenes? Like why did I make you guys, because that's like science and math. Is basically the Greeks are freaking brilliant. The Greeks are freaking amazing. And so this was an example of when, this was actually in the context of Alexander the Great. And Alexander the Great spreads kind of Greek culture when he goes and conquers everything. He names everything Alexandria. When he goes and conquers everything, that's called Hellenism, or the Hellenistic period. Hellas is Greece, and so Hellenism is the spread of Greek culture kind of everywhere. That example was supposed to show this was an example of like Greek science. And the big idea was that, holy crap, Greek science, they're all amazing. Like they can figure out the circumference of the Earth with a stick. But it's an example of Greek science and the spread of Hellenism. So that's why we did that. Yo.
Can you explain the difference between, like the similarity between the funeral oration and
Gettysburg? Yeah, so I took that off the study guide, I think. I mean, I said Pericles' funeral oration, but you don't have to know Gettysburg. See, so I mostly kind of just don't know how to test that without making you guys memorize all that stuff. What war is Pericles' funeral oration in Peloponnesian? Yeah, I'm looking at all the study guide questions, looking for.
We're talking about that.
Yeah, so in ancient Greece, the differences between liberal education, educational utilitarianism, who talks about that? That's it's generally just kind of the ancient Greek view of education, and it would definitely be this is an elite kind of thing because it's founded on slavery, right? And so the idea is I mean, you could do it as a thought experiment in the United States. Like all of a sudden we have, I mean, do it instead of slaves, maybe do robots, right? You have robots that do everything for you, right? You don't have to do anything ever again. How do you spend your time? And liberal education is designed as an answer to that question, kind of. So they had slaves to do everything for them, they had slaves to do their work for them. So they didn't need an education to work. They needed an education to use their time wisely when they weren't working, which is most of the time. Also, they needed an education since it was democracy, to make good decisions about how to run their country. But broadly, the philosophical model of liberal education, liberal means free, liberty means free, and so it's a free education in the sense that you don't have to work. You've got other people. You're free. You're not a slave. That's the kind of liberty you have. And the way I've described it to other people is it's the type of education that makes you appreciate. It tries to make you fully human. Whereas educational utilitarianism is just training for a specific job, liberal education is trying to make you appreciate everything that humanity can do. So, like, be able to appreciate good music, be able to appreciate poetry. Liberal education also included physical exercise, and so like be able to train and use your body kind of the way the best humans can have used it. To do math, not just for the practical value, but just because the human mind is able to reach these kind of amazing heights in mathematics. That's partly why you're learning that, is because you're learning how humans have been excellent humans, basically. So I don't like to read poetry that much personally, but I think that's my fault, and like rather than poetry's fault, right? And so like I think I would probably be a broader, more interesting person if I actually knew more poetry, right? Or knew better music. And so liberal education is designed to be more general and more human. So it's an education into what it means to be human. And so you read Shakespeare and modern examples because like Shakespeare touches on all these different things about humanity. And so you appreciate that. Rather than just studying how to wire your house for electricity, or rather than just studying how to be an engineer, or just studying how to operate on brains, right? So educational utilitarianism is how to operate on a brain. Liberal education is how to spend your time on the weekends after you've operated on brains. Like that's the idea behind it. How to use your free time wisely. So for us, who still have to work in the United States or whatever, the liberal education is designed technically for how do you spend your free time? How do you become more human in your free time and you can imagine some people there's so many different ways to be human. part of liberal education is trying to like tap into all those different things and to be excellent at being human. One more, or is that good? Yeah, so which one is the Greek view? If I said the Greek view of education, which one is the Greek view? Liberal. Right. Utilitarianism is specific and practical and do it to get a job. Mm-hmm. 4. So there's 4 characters for the dialogue, and they all have to speak 4 or 5 times. Huh? Well, I actually haven't thought about this, but I mean, you could probably. So what would be some options for characters? You could probably. There might not be that many. What would be some options? Like who are various people or names that we've studied throughout? So it could be like Herodotus, and then Thucydides, Tacitus, right? Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. Eratosthenes, the science guy. Augustine. Your character and what? In 44 BCE, Cicero or Mark Antony or Brutus or Caesar or Cleopatra. And Henry VIII. And then like Narnia, right? So I guess there's like 11, I think, right? Like about 11. Well, if it were Henry VIII character, everybody's would be different. And if it were, would you guys also bring up the 44 BC? Those would be different, right? Like at least Caesar versus Cicero. Or I already told you it's not going to be Herodotus and Thucydides or Plato. I think was my example, right? But that's. I mentioned him in that. But that, in terms of a dialogue, basically you would think, okay, if I mean, you could practice thinking that way and say, okay, like, and pick 4 of those characters. And one of them is going to be Henry VIII character. I'll tell you that. Your Henry VIII character. So that person and 3 others, whoever they are. But it might help even to, you could just do a fake dialogue for practice, or even just like to help you think through, like what 4 things would you say to show that you understood the Henry VIII stuff? And the Henry VIII stuff could also be not just the character, but like what happened during the, because your character relates to that because they even voted on stuff, right? Christmas party. It's a Christmas party. That's it. They can be at the punch bowl. They can be dancing. They can be in the bathroom.
all be together?
Usually, every now and then, some people have characters like they walk up and join the group, you know, something like that. So maybe for practice, it's not Play-Doh, but just trying to think. If we did practice Play-Doh and your Henry VIII character, you were oddly, Jed was more, a what? Plymouth, yeah. The only one I'm going to tell you is your Henry VIII character. Oh, who isn't? Herodotus and Thucydides and Plato. So yeah, maybe you don't use Plato. Maybe you use somebody else. I mean, I was talking to you about some of the perennial, what I described as like how the Reformation Parliament raises lots of interesting perennial issues, namely the relationship between the church and the state and who has more authority or more power, the church versus the government. That could also relate even to Plato. And Plato's asking which world is more important, the invisible spiritual world or the physical world? And Henry VIII is kind of giving an answer to that, right? Practically, it's the physical world, right? The king is supreme over the church. Some of the other issues about like corruption, because Henry VIII is also about in terms of morality, right? You've got Henry who's, I mean, you can think about his relationship to power. So he's kind of doing, like if you have 6 wives, you're kind of doing whatever you want, right? If you're beheading various wives, if you're trying to name yourself the supreme head of the church. He's also interested in succession, right? He wants stability in the empire. I don't know, like go to Narnia. Is there anything about succession or rightful succession or the empire being stabilized? These are, so I haven't thought of all this stuff. That would be an example. So think in terms of, can you apply your Reformation character to Narnia?
I feel like concerned about like his loss.
There's some succession stuff in, there's King Miraz, and what's his nickname, if you recall? Miraz the Usurper. And usurper is someone who takes the throne illegally, basically. Right. But what I want you guys to do is kind of go in depth and give examples. If you would just say, Henry doesn't want the throne taken and neither does Miraz, or something, you know, like that's super general. So you would show your expertise on those issues. But yeah, so that's a connection. That's an interesting connection about the line of succession for Henry VIII and Jed, like War of the Roses and all that stuff, right? Because didn't you have to do War of the Roses? Like that's related to almost like probably Mraz. And so one reason why come in whenever, we're fine. So yeah, it would be an interesting intellectual exercise to try to connect Henry VIII to Narnia stories. And that would be worthwhile, actually, to do. That would most likely be like a dialogue. Hello, single female. Not single, sole female. Only female. And I haven't thought that hard about this. Like, so Caspian, Caspian is about, if you recall, which god Caspian represented. It was the god of war, right? Mars. There's all sorts of stuff about fighting and war. There's a lot of kingly stuff about acting like a king. Different people in Henry VIII had to deal with Machiavelli or Lutheranism. Like, I don't know if Lutheranism had any, like if you're in the Renaissance, I don't know if Lutheranism has much to do with Silver Chair or Prince Caspian. I'd have to think about that. I don't know. Any of you, like, were supposed to be experts on Lutheranism at all? So Lutheranism says, a couple things that it says is it doesn't like the worship of the saints in Catholicism. It believes that God has chosen people for salvation. It says that you don't need the Pope to interpret the Bible for you or the church. You can just have the Bible by itself. That you don't have to do any works to gain salvation. That you can just believe. They call it justification by faith. And so it's worth asking, like, does that kind of stuff show up anywhere in Narnia in terms of Prince Caspian or Silver Chair? I do remember that in the Silver Chair, there's a whole bunch of stuff about the signs and saying the signs over and over and over again, if you recall. Aslan gives. Yeah, I don't even remember what the signs are. But those totally are symbolic of the Bible, of Scripture. Jill Pole and Eustace Scrubb. And so those are totally symbolic of the Bible in the sense that, so actually in the Old Testament, there's various commands to recite the words of the Bible, the law, over and over, day and night. And that's what Aslan exactly says. He quotes from some part of the Bible, I don't recall, maybe Joshua. That's one tie into Lutheranism in Silver Chair, at least. So anyway, those of you just coming in, we were talking about the test and then In the dialogue, which is half of your grade on that test, 50 points out of 100, we numbered off all the different people who you might have to write the dialogue about. It's 4 total. And I said that one of them was for sure your Henry VIII character. And I said that for sure it wasn't Herodotus, Thucydides, or Plato. So if you have 2 characters in that, usually when you transition characters, they're not all that different. They usually have a lot of the same beliefs, so that it should flow pretty well. Yeah, so Machiavellianism, Thomas Cromwell was supposed to be a Machiavellian. And what a Machiavellian is, and this is actually a common word, I don't know if it's common, but it's a current vocabulary word that shows up on SAT and ACT. Like, so that word, even though it's from the 1500s, if you're Machiavellian in your behavior, like Trump could be Machiavellian or Kim Jong-un could be Machiavellian, you don't worry about morality except as it helps you stay in power. Your goal is just to stay in power. And so you will stab anybody in the back that you need to. You will betray whoever you need to. You will appear to be virtuous and noble and honest, but then you will turn around and do the exact opposite. You will form alliances and break them. You will do whatever it takes to stay in power. And so if someone is Machiavellian, you know that they will stab you in the back first chance they get, if they need to. But they will also be as nice as they can be to you. And so I gave the example, Machiavellianism is a little bit like Mean Girls culture, right? Like in Mean Girls, they will be as nice as they need to be to you, right? They'll butter you up and be super thoughtful, but then they'll talk about you the moment you walk away. So Mean Girls is kind of about Machiavellianism, I think, probably. Yeah. So Machiavelli writes a book called The Prince, and the prince is basically the king or the ruler, and he's giving advice, because actually Machiavelli serves in the government for like 14 years, and then he gets kicked out when a new power comes in. He gets tortured, and so he's got experience in all this like power intrigue, and so he writes a book to the prince or the ruler, like, here's how, what's it say, how to get power, how to stay in power, how to expand power. And so yeah, he's all about how to get power and keep it and seize it and grow it. That's Machiavellianism, yeah. So if somebody's ethics if somebody's against Machiavelli, their ethics would be standing up for like real right and wrong. So John Fisher and Thomas More, who both in this game get executed for refusing to basically pledge allegiance to the king above the Pope, they would be examples of like anti-Machiavellians, because they could have done that and like kept kind of rising to power. But John Fisher says, I will not sign this, and he gets arrested and executed. Thomas More steps down and resigns because he's not going to like compromise his principles. And Machiavelli's like, principles? What are those? So Erasmus is one of the people in the Henry VIII simulation that some of you. Erasmus is a devout Catholic. Um, I'm thinking about. So I was telling everybody one interesting like intellectual practice that might do you some good would be to think about different possible dialogue people that we've talked about and then see what you would say about them. So you could do your Henry VIII character and your 44 BCE character, right? Henry VIII and Caesar. I don't know who you had, you know, Caesar or Mark Antony or Brutus or Cicero or Cleopatra. And like, how are they similar? How are they different? Yeah, so Salamis and Plataea or Plataea. Um, all right. Salamis and Plataea. What's the background? Well, so it might be instructive. Who writes about it? Herodotus. Because Herodotus is a vacuum going on. I heard it for the last 2 hours. So Herodotus is writing about Salamis and Plataea. There's two Persian invasions of Greece. Is this the first invasion or the second invasion? Salamis and Plataea. Huh? It's the second. The first invasion is by Darius, who's the guy who's like, Master, remember the Athenians, remember the Athenians. And Darius comes and loses at the Battle of Marathon. Then his son, Xerxes, you might remember Xerxes, I'm making this up off the top of my head, so I don't know if it is helpful, but you might remember Xerxes is the second battle, or the second invasion, because X is like very towards the end of the alphabet, so he's the second, not the first. So Xerxes is the one who basically is going to fight for daddy and avenge his daddy's loss at Marathon. So Darius loses at Marathon. Xerxes Herodotus says he brings 2 million men. Part of the backdrop, Herodotus is telling us about pride and warning us of empires that will fall. And so, part of trying to mute some people here. So Salamis and Plataea. Xerxes is invading Greece. This is the second Greek invasion of Persia. Herodotus is telling us about this because Herodotus writes about the Greco-Persian Wars to warn us against pride and tell us about the changeability of history. So Xerxes' pride, he ignores various omens. There's the guy named Pythias who has 5 sons, and he's like, hey, Xerxes, can like at least one of my sons stay home and take care of me in case they all die? And Xerxes is like, they're not all going to die. You are not having trust in me. And Xerxes' pride, he ends up killing that eldest son and placing him on the 2 gates where the armies walk past. And so Xerxes invades Greece, and he burns Athens. And ultimately, this is where the battles of Salamis and Plataea take place. So Salamis is a naval battle. Just trying to remember stupid things for, I think, one of the classes we came up with. How do you remember that Salamis is a naval battle and Plataea is like a land battle? Like a plateau? Salamis, salamander? Salamis, salmon? I don't know. So Salamis is a naval water battle. Plataea is a land battle. Plateau, Plataea, plateau, land. So basically, Plataea is a naval battle that the Greeks win. Both of these are battles that Greeks win, and they're like super important battles that are the nails in the coffin for the Persian invasion. You don't need to know the kind of details of how they were fought. But Salamis, the Greeks win. Plataea, the Greeks win, and then Persia retreats back to Persia. The Persians retreat back to Persia. As Herodotus says, they're eating they're eating bark, weeds, leaves. They're ravaged by disease, dying of dysentery. And so when Xerxes is back to his home, he has hardly any army left to speak of. And one of you all's, I guess it's the play called The Persians. Some of you, because you guys need to know your Greek plays. And that'll be important for you to know your Greek plays, yes? Like the plot. Or all other questions? Broadcast settings. As guests join, hide their audio and video from my broadcast. I think yes. Broadcast the large video that I see and hide the other video feeds. Probably yes. New guests in my broadcast are muted when they join. Yes. There you go. Yo. Yeah, so Tacitus's approach to history. Tacitus is Roman. So there's 2 Greek historians and there's 1 Roman historian that I've highlighted. Who are the 2 Greek historians? Huh? Herodotus and Thucydides. The Roman historian is Tacitus. I brought him up just because he's super famous in terms of one of the first historians. So Tacitus is writing in the time of the Roman emperors. I'll share the screen for Tacitus again.
What the?
So he's like the first century, basically, of Rome, and he's writing about the emperors. So he describes life under the Caesars. And here's a list of the kind of stuff that he talks about. I'm reading from the Tacitus the Great document that you guys have online, which would be under the first unit. So it says, describing life under the Caesars restricted Tacitus chiefly to recording cowardly betrayals, petty rivalries of courtesans and freedmen and slaves. So like rivalries in the court, acts of vengeance and horrific cruelty, assassination, execution, enforced suicide. Enforced suicide is kind of a fun, interesting topic, just because here's the way sometimes emperors would kill you. If you were like close to them in their councils, they would say, okay, they'd bring a soldier or somebody, and they'd say, hey, Emperor Nero has ordered you to die. You need to kill yourself in the next 6 hours, or we'll do it for you. And then you kill yourself. That's enforced suicide. Regicide, that's killing of kings. Patricide, killing of fathers. Matricide, killing of mothers. Siblicide, killing of siblings in the Roman Empire during the 1st century AD. Enormity was business as usual. And so Tacitus is basically recording all these stories, and I would summarize Tacitus's history as like, oh my gosh, we suck. Or, oh my gosh, the emperors suck. The main thing I want you guys to kind of talk about is Tiberius. And Tiberius, I've highlighted it right now on the screencast here. Tiberius reigns for 22 years, and he balances like super cruelty with being really deceitful. So Tacitus describes Tiberius, and he basically says he's a monstrous pervert. He becomes tyrannical. He gives tyrants power. Tacitus says that his criminal lusts shamed him. Their uncontrollable activity was worthy of an Oriental tyrant. I don't know what that means, because they probably don't know that much about Oriental tyrants, so they're whatever. But basically, he's out of control. He focuses on freeborn children. So he's a pedophile, he's a tyrant, he's a pervert, and the rest of these descriptions of Tiberius. And Tacitus is just horrified at these leaders. So in terms of how he does history, Tacitus tells us the history of crappy leaders, and he wants us to be horrified. And so it's worth
I had a 95 in the past.
So it's worth asking, like, what would Tacitus think of Henry VIII's, court and life in the Reformation Parliament? Or what would Herodotus think of Henry VIII's court? And if I ask you, what would Herodotus think of Henry VIII's court, the Reformation Parliament, what two topics am I asking you to look at? If I say Herodotus, how does Herodotus tell history? What are his two foci? Pride and change, right? Empires rise, empires fall. Pride will bring you down. So you would look for examples of pride and change in Henry VIII and the Reformation Parliament. If I asked you to do Thucydides in the Reformation Parliament, what would you be looking for? How does Thucydides tell his history? Human nature and power. How human nature doesn't change, and how morality, especially when it comes to war or like pressure situations, morality goes out the window and principles, noble principles go out the window, and how people who have power will boss you around and dominate you whenever chance they get. If I asked you to talk about Tacitus and what he would think of Henry VIII, what would he be looking for? Huh? Tacitus. I describe Tacitus' history in one word: corruption, looking for corruption. In theory, I could imagine, I guess, all three of them, like, looking at different things that fit their histories.
I was talking about like Augustine and Constantine, and like Augustine keeping Christianity and that's
Yeah. So Augustine versus Constantine in terms of keeping stuff separate. So Constantine wants to blend Christianity and the Roman Empire. In the sense, and the best example I have would be when you're painting crosses on your shields. It's pretty hard to determine like what's Christianity and what's the Roman Empire. They're kind of blended. And the analogy that that the writer that you guys read, I wonder if it would be helpful to bring that up. Let's see if I can find it. Screen share it here. So this should be in the Rome and St. Augustine reading. So it's City of God Summary, Pecknold. I just bought this book for $20 so I could own it because I think it's really good. So that's where it would be from. Let me download this. What were we talking about? Oh, yeah. Okay. Okay, so I'm on page 6 of 8 on the City of God Summary by Pecknold. Pecknold actually taught a Twitter class. He basically asked if anybody would be interested in following along on Twitter, and then you would hashtag City of God, And on Thursday nights, then they had this online discussion, and they read the City of God, like one book or chapter every week or something, and like 12,000 people signed up for reading the City of God via Twitter. Anyway, he's the guy who wrote this. So on this page it says, perhaps it will sound to some like Augustine has argued that church and empire, what empire? Rome. Church and empire become even more closely entwined. This would be wrong. At the heart of Augustine's reply is the great reversal of the absorption of Christianity into the empire that had taken place since Constantine. I don't know if I can highlight this or not. Not totally. Constantine had wanted to bring Christianity as close to Rome as possible. So the idea is Augustine wants to reverse the fact that the Roman Empire and Christianity have been absorbed, or more specifically, Rome has absorbed Christianity. So in that same paragraph, they have the word contrast society underlined. And so Augustine wanted a very different kind of reversal, a reversal that at once freed the church from being ordered to the state. And so actually think of that. That should ring a bell with Henry VIII and the Reformation Parliament. Augustine wanted to free the church from being ordered to the state. That's the exact opposite of some of the legislation in Henry VIII. What was the Supremacy Act? Yeah, so the Supremacy Act was where England and Parliament voted that Henry VIII was the supreme head of the church. And so Augustine would be like, yeah, no thanks. What would Constantine think of the Supremacy Act? Constantine would love that, right? So Augustine wants the church to be a contrast society. And he says, set clear limits on the political order which gave it conditional autonomy and called it to higher service. Another thing about Augustine versus Constantine, I would say the Veterans Day, was it Veterans Day? The November 11th, the Veterans Day ceremony that we had in the gym, was that Augustinian, or was it Constantinian? It was very Constantinian because you're saying the Pledge of Allegiance and you're praying in the next couple breaths, right? And so in terms of merging Christianity and United States, that would be a Constantinian type of thing. Augustine would say, no, we want the church to be a contrast society. We want to always keep it clear that the church is different from Rome, or the church is different from America. So Augustine versus Constantine. I think it could totally tie in with Reformation Parliament. It's a good question. In terms of, it's a constant issue. So tying in with the Reformation Parliament, should the church be supreme or should the state be supreme? This is a constant battle. I mean, Roy Moore, the guy who's running for re-election, or not re-election, for election to the Senate tomorrow, who's been accused by multiple women of sexual harassment. He was well known for wanting to put the Ten Commandments outside the courthouse of the church, or outside the courthouse of the state judiciary. So he, like, this question of, should we use the church as we're running the state? This is always an issue for thousands of years. So the Reformation Parliament in terms of Henry being supreme over the church, or the church being supreme over Henry, or Henry wanting a divorce and the church saying no, and him being like, I don't really care what you say, church. Like all of those issues, like does the king have to listen to the Pope? Who has more authority in that situation? Always an issue, yeah. Good question. So would Augustine be now like, see, these are all these syntheses, this is my kind of thing, which makes me think this is the kind of thing I want you guys to do on the test, and maybe I'll put that. So would Augustine be anti-clericalism? So let me think. So anti-clericalism is anti-clergy, and anti-clergy is different people in the simulation were motivated by different reasons for being anti-clergy. Some of the people were anti-clergy simply because the clergy were like corrupt and they were charging too much money for wills and charging too much money for funerals. Some of the people in the game were anti-clergy because they wanted to reduce the church's power, which is different, right, from the church being corrupt. Like the church might be just wonderful, but you still don't want them to have so much power. And then other people were anti-clerical because they were pro-Lutheran, and it wasn't so much anti-clergy as they were anti-Catholic because they liked the Lutheran stuff. So thinking of that way, I would say that Augustine is not anti-clerical. He'd probably be in favor of reform if there's crap going on in the church. Yeah. Yeah, good. So let me pull. I'm going to pull up that reading. Pecknold. So he says, so about Augustine, wasn't he defending the clergy when Rome fell? So I'm trying to find on the City of God summary on Pecknold. So here's what it says. So when the city of God, when Rome falls, Augustine has two goals: to show Romans why Christianity was not to blame. And so that's an interesting question about like relating to the Reformation Parliament. If you relate with Augustine saying Christianity is not to blame, and why Christianity is Rome's true sanctuary and hope. And then what's interesting about the English situation is there's now two Christianities. What are the two Christianities? One starts with an L and one starts with a C. Lutheranism and Catholicism, right? And so it's not like, that's what's tricky, is the Lutherans are like, no, we're the real Christianity. And the Catholics are like, no, we're the real Christianity. So that adds another complicated element into the Reformation Parliament of which Christianity are we going to adopt. And saying that they're both Christianity, I'm being super insulting to the 1500s, because no way would the Catholics have said, oh, the Lutherans are really just a different type of Christian. They'd say, no, those are damned heretics. And they mean damned to hell heretics. And the Lutherans would say to the Catholics, no, you guys are damn heretics. Damn to hell heretics, right? That's why you burn them at the stake. So me saying, oh, there's two Christianities, that's me doing 21st century stuff. At that time, they're like, this is not two different Christianities that just need to get along. These are two different answers. And one's right and one is wrong. So that's kind of just interesting to know in terms of the history I'm totally imposing my tolerant, Christianity onto the 1500s. Yeah, I think the more you can ask, like weave, like that'll help you think more. Weave different stuff together, like see later. The more you can weave this thing from the first unit to the Renaissance, Reformation, Parliament, the better, like the more helpful it'll be to think about these things. So those kind of questions are good. That's a good. I would say this is one of the more valuable screencasts I've done. Or whatever. I've reviewed all the basics now. Now this is more high level stuff. This is good. So other kind of maybe random or weird connections between different units, or like, are there similarities between the Reformation Parliament and something else? Yeah. Are you gonna have to compare anything Narnia? Yes. I'm not going to specify what you have to compare about Narnia. It'll basically be pick something like a person, some events, or a particular character, or like certain scenes or certain plot elements, and use that in like connecting it to something else. But that's exactly what I've tried to give you examples of. That you already did, and I'm trying to design it so you can't use the examples I already gave that you guys wrote in. Yeah.
So like, what if Plato's algorithm?
Right. So Plato's allegory of the cave and the Green Witch is totally a connection if you have to do Plato, but you don't have to do Plato, right? But being like, so thinking about, and so this is where you just make it up, and some of these I haven't even thought of, right? So can you connect anything in Narnia to Thucydides? I've already told you that Thucydides won't be on, so maybe pick another topic, but I won't pick it for you, right? I've already told you that Herodotus and Thucydides won't be one of the comparisons, but is there something in Narnia, or like, so can you compare Tacitus to Narnia? That's a good question to think through. First off, you need to know what is, I'd want to know what Tacitus, so here's what you wouldn't do. You wouldn't say, Tacitus is a historian and somebody else in Narnia is a historian. Like actually, there's a historian in Narnia. Who is it? He tells history. It's the little dwarf. Is he a dwarf? The Dr. Cornelius. Is he a dwarf? Yeah. So Dr. Cornelius kind of tells history, actually. That's actually why I had you guys read Prince Caspian for the first unit, because Prince Caspian is a lot about how to tell the stories of Narnia, how to interpret it, because there's a scene where they're retelling the story with the White Witch. They're the White Witch of Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and they're in Aslan's How, and there's people that are like covered up. It turns out it's a werewolf and a hag, but they don't know that it's them quite yet. And I think it's Nickabrick saying, "Hey, why don't we summon back the White Witch? She would help us." And Truffle Hunter and Caspian are like, "No, she's evil." And Nickabrick is like, "Well, she had power, man. She kept Narnia frozen for 100 years, baby." And so they're like, was the witch good or bad for Narnia? They're fighting over the interpretations of history. So Tacitus and Narnia. The first thing you need to know is what's Tacitus's deal. Tacitus is a Greek or Roman historian. Roman. And he talks about the corruption of the emperors. and the Caesars and how they're well, at least Tiberius is a pedophile and deceptive and a tyrant. So, is there anybody in Narnia that Tacitus would like write his histories about? Who's the uncle? Yeah, that's who I was thinking of. Uncle, it's Miraz. M-I-R-A-Z, right? Miraz. The Miraz, interestingly, right, he's called Miraz the Usurper. And usurp came up a lot in the story of the War of the Roses in terms of this person is usurping the crown, and that's exactly what Henry VIII doesn't want to happen, that Elizabeth becomes queen and somebody usurps the crown. So Miraz the Usurper. I think in Silver Chair, if you could say how the Green Witch, the Lady of the Green Kirtle, the Green Witch is corrupt in like Tacitus would look for her corruption. You'd have to give examples of how she's corrupt. But that's what Tacitus would highlight. Yeah, for sure.
For the dialogue, are the characters that like you're choosing from, are those like characters who point talk about like they were telling, is it the people who were telling the story?
So we earlier, some of these people were in here. We went through the possible characters that might be in the dialogues, and we went through. We said, like, just think about here's some of the possibilities, based on the study guide. What are you gonna say? All right, go for it.
Thesis, Tacitus, Socrates, Pericles, Aristotle, Augustine, Constantine, Darius, Eratosthenes, the ancient Greek character,
So nobody else in the screencast heard that. So Croesus. Well, say it slow. So these are all these would be possible people, right? That theoretically I could have. I already printed these out, so that it's done deal. But Croesus. So these are this list. These are possible people that you would maybe have to incorporate into your dialogue, right? The dialogue's 4 people. I've already said to various groups that for sure your Henry VIII character is on there. Like, you can rest assured. Yeah. I have everybody's sheets over there. So possible people that you maybe would have to include in this dialogue, and I'll tell you who. Croesus, maybe. Tacitus, Socrates, Pericles, Aristotle, Augustine, Constantine, Darius, the Persian, Eratosthenes, the scientist, your ancient, or that says ancient Greece character, but it's your ancient Rome character, your 44 BCE character, Caesar. It's not. It would be one of these. It'd be whoever you had. Although I can't remember who you had, so technically you could do whoever you had, like whoever you want. I won't know, but I would think you would do the person you had. Caesar, Brutus, Mark Antony, Cicero, Cleopatra. I think those are the options. That would be a possibility. Your Henry VIII character, Narnia characters. So I personally think you guys should start a pool and bet money on different characters, on which 4 characters I choose, and then whoever guesses it, and like you do $1 per vote, and then whoever guesses it, you guys like after the final, you come out. And, it's a way to make money. I'm just saying.
Very multiple model, encouraging betting.
Gambling. There it is again. Why do they keep Oh, I know.
I think they do it.
No, I thought it was vacuuming. He's fixing the photocopy. So, I mean, I will tell you that these are going to be more major people than minor people. If you can try and figure out who's major versus minor in some of these things. No.
Small.
Yeah. But that intellectual exercise of connecting, yeah. I have no idea.
Alright, so this is whole.
But yeah, so that intellectual exercise of connecting, like doing random, being like, hey, what would, and maybe you do a lot of it with Henry VIII character since you already know that that's for sure on there. Can you connect your Henry VIII character with anybody in Narnia? Can you connect your Henry VIII character with anybody in St. Augustine? Or like the values of St. Augustine? And by the way, you shouldn't be able to do this within 5 seconds. If you can, you're like scary smart. If you gave me some connection, I would have to think about it for like, who knows, maybe a minute or two at least, right? So I expect you to be like thinking and kind of planning for a while in the final of like, okay, who, like, how do they connect to whatever? So that's a really good question. I don't actually totally know what you said, but here's what I think you said. Did you or would you or could you pick people that we can actually make connections to? So here's how you can do it even if it's not. You could basically do similarities or differences. And so since you could do similarities or differences, that pretty much makes it wide open, right? Because you could be like, hey, Henry VIII character, you and I have nothing in common. You think this, but I believe this, right? So you could totally do the opposites. They don't always have to talk to each other, right? Like they might agree with, if it's person A, B, C, and D, D might never say something to A, right? But D might only talk to. But you want to kind of connect everything. And if you're totally at a loss, what is my overall purpose? To see that you know about all these people. So just write stuff about each person, right? Like if you're like, I have no idea what they would say, then just tell me a bunch of stuff about your Henry VIII character, right? Like that's your emergency switch. Your parachute. What else? At some point in all of these videos, I've definitely like spoken on every single thing on the final thus far. I mean, I can just ask you random questions if you want. Huh? Yeah? Yes. If you find the Monday morning study sesh on the 9th minute, I talk about that there. That's what I meant on the, so that's what I meant on the text when I was like, what would be amazing is if and all it would take is this, as you're going through, you're listening and you're like, okay, it's minute 4. He just started talking about Aristotle, right? And then that would be on the comments. And then everybody would know that minute 4, Aristotle starts. And then at minute 7, it would be like, oh, he's talking about Tacitus. And then at minute 11, oh, like here's Herodotus or whatever, like that. Nobody did, as far as I can tell, nobody did that. Or I don't know if like comments aren't, I can't do that as far as I can tell. So, let me go over it. I'll pull it up in screen share and then talk through it. Maybe I'll actually try and find a different answer. I don't know if I'm screen sharing right now, actually. Nope. All right, so Pericles' funeral oration. This time I think I'll actually try and find the actual Pericles text, Pericles. Oh, that's from last year. So Pericles, funeral oration and Gettysburg Address. So I want to pull up the actual funeral oration. See if I can find the democracy parts. And I can show you where this is on your Windows too. So Pericles' funeral oration should be in ancient Greece. Let's see. Must be in ancient Greece unit 2, probably. Pericles' funeral oration and Gettysburg Address. So let me show it here. Huh? No, I'm taking an hour break. All right, so so basically page 2 of Pericles' funeral oration, and it's 4 pages, praises democracy. So how he praises democracy. He says a couple things. He says, we don't copy other people. They copy our form of government. They copy us. He says, our Constitution favors the many instead of the few, right? The democracy favors the many of the few. He says our laws give equal justice to everybody, even though everybody's different. And social, like class, like the opposite of Henry VIII, he would want to say. We are totally democratic. So social standing doesn't matter. Whether you're a duke or a commoner doesn't matter. Whether you have chits or no chits doesn't matter. Advancement in public life falls to reputation for capacity. You can advance in governance if you're just capable, not if you're only a duke. He says class considerations are not allowed to interfere with merit. Whether you're a duke or a commoner doesn't matter. What matters is if you are merited, if you deserve to do it. He says, nor again does poverty bar the way. If a man is able to serve the state, he is not hindered by the obscurity of his condition. He says, part of democracy, we don't even care what you do in private. You can do whatever you want. And so he praises Athens. He praises democracy. So I guess Pericles' funeral oration, he doesn't just praise democracy. He praises Athens. He's like, Athens is worth fighting for, baby. But part of that, he praises the democracy. I'm looking for one where he says, like, we think it's good if we actually debate stuff and discuss things. Um, so page 2 of this is his praise of Athens. Some of it's democracy. Shoot. Yeah. Yeah, so we'll look at like Persians, Athens, timeline, all that stuff. Looking for the word. Oh, there it is. So the last way he praises democracy is he says, instead of looking at discussion as a stumbling block to action, we think it is indispensable before we make any moves or actions. So he's like, we debate and discuss because we're in a democracy and everybody's giving their opinions and all that kind of thing. So that's Pericles' funeral oration. The context, just to remind you, is it's the Peloponnesian War, which is Athens versus Sparta. And so that's Greece versus Greece. And Athens is trying to be the dominant power in Greece. And so Thucydides is telling us about Pericles' dialogue. And so the bodies are coming home. People are, Athenians are dying. Brothers, fathers, sons are dying. And so Pericles is writing to encourage the Athenians to keep fighting in the Peloponnesian War against Sparta by saying Athens is worth fighting for, and especially Athens' democracy. So that's the Peloponnesian War context for Pericles' funeral oration. So the other question about trying to keep straight, Persia. So Greece and Persia. Modern day, you know the modern day Persia? Iran. So even geographically, it might, maybe a map might, like, for your miracle stuff, I don't know, or maybe even just to keep, you know, maybe you pull up a map. And so Iran is basically Persia. I mean, Persia expands big time, but Babylon was Iraq. And then Greece is kind of across the ocean a little bit there, kind of across the Mediterranean, or the Aegean Sea.
Is Babylon the same as Athens?
No. So Athens is Greece. Persia is, it wouldn't be bad to just say Persia is the East. It's the East. Or it's on the right for people like me. Persia's on the right. So Persia's the East.
The whole like Cyrus the Great, that was
Cyrus is Persia. So the rulers of Persia, there's at least one person I'm leaving out, but it basically goes Cyrus. This is helpful, actually. Cyrus, Darius, Xerxes. And that actually works nicely because CDX, right, is like alphabetical. So Cyrus, Darius, Xerxes, that's the order of Persian rulers. So Cyrus makes Persia mighty. And that's the story of Croesus and Solon, because Croesus was basically kind of, he's from a place called Lydia, which is like the very left side of Persia. It's like almost in the middle of Greece and Persia. He's in Lydia. And Croesus is the rich guy who says, hey, asks the Oracle of Delphi, hey, he hears about Cyrus and is like, hey, should I like smack him down? And the Oracle says, if you attack Cyrus, you will destroy a great empire. And it's his own empire that he destroys. And this helps Cyrus, the Persian, become mighty. And ultimately, Darius and Xerxes are the Persians who come and attack Greece. So CDX is Cyrus, Darius, Xerxes. Those are the Persian rulers. And Pericles is the Athenian ruler who's praising democracy. Yeah. So I don't have any cutesy like mnemonic devices off the top of my head to remember like who's Persia versus who's Croesus.
Thank you. I've caved.
Yeah, I'll bet.
3.5.
I know.
Thank you.
How long were you here?
I've been here since 8.
Oh, wow.
So who's Croesus?
No, like
So technically he's in Lydia, which if I recall is kind of like Turkey-ish.
okay. And then he tries to fight various. He's not Persia or Egypt.
So you can do Croesus, Cyrus.
Yeah, okay.
Croesus goes with Cyrus. And remember, Herodotus is telling this story, all these names. But Herodotus is telling this story, and Herodotus is telling stories based on examples of pride and examples of change. And so he tells the story of Croesus because Croesus has pride and change is going to happen to him. And how is he proud? One of the ways is that he tells Solon, he says, am I not the happiest man in the world? I'm so happy, right? Blah, blah, blah. Croesus. And Croesus says, I'm the happiest man in the world. And Solon says, call no one happy until they're dead. And Herodotus wants us to remember this because fortune will always change. Like your life is destined to change. And empires are destined to rise and empires are destined to fall. So he tells the story of Croesus and says, Croesus is proud. Croesus goes to the oracle and asks, can I destroy Cyrus? And he says, the oracle says, if you attack Cyrus, a great empire, if you attack Cyrus, you will destroy a great empire. And Croesus's pride leads him to think, oh, the great empire is Cyrus that I will destroy, but it's actually his empire. So in terms of the changeability, Croesus was a mighty ruler. And when he fights Cyrus, he ends up being burned at the stake. And so that's an example of Herodotus's history saying pride, change will always be happening to you. Or pride will screw you up. You will always experience change. So while Croesus changes in terms of he falls, who does Croesus fight that changes and is on the rise?
Greeks.
Huh?
Was it Greeks?
Not yet. Who did I say Croesus fights? Cyrus. So Cyrus is on the rise. Cyrus is Persia. CDX is Persia. Cyrus, Darius, and Xerxes. I don't know how you can remember CDX Persia. CDX, 3 letters. Cat, Persian cats. So now Persia's becoming mighty. But Herodotus, who tells us about the Greek-Persian wars, still always wants to warn us against pride and about change. And so he's going to tell the story of the Greek-Persian wars to show how not Persia starts to rise now, because Persia's mighty, but now he's going to show how another group of people start to become mighty. Who fights the Persians? Who does Persia invade and try to attack? The Greeks. So Herodotus tells us of the Greco-Persian Wars, or the Greek-Persian Wars. Darius, he's the one who, CDX, Darius, Cyrus, Darius, and Xerxes. Darius has had a revolt in his realm, which is kind of the same area where Croesus used to live. That area has kind of been revolting, and they burned the capital city, one of the capitals of Persia, Sardis. And so Darius tells a servant every day, whisper in my ear, remember the Athenians, remember the Athenians, remember the Athenians. And Darius ends up attacking Athens, and that's the Battle of Marathon, the first invasion of ancient Greece. And Herodotus is telling us this story because change is going to happen, because Greece, the small little group of people, defeat the mighty Persians. And that's invasion 1. And then in invasion 2, the empire strikes back. Xerxes now brings like 2 million people, full of pride though, to attack Athens. And there's all sorts of examples of Xerxes' pride, where they're trying to bridge across this gap called the Hellespont, and a storm wipes out the bridge, and so he has them whip the ocean and like fight against the gods. And where one of his big donors says, hey, I have 5 sons that are fighting for you. Can one of them like be held back and take care of me in my old age in case they die? And Xerxes says, what? You think they're going to die? Like, you coward, or whatever. And so he has that son cut in half and split and set on the top of the gates as the mighty army is coming in. And Xerxes is telling us this because of pride and change. He's going to show us how Xerxes' pride makes him fall. And then when they finally cross the water, they see a horse give birth to a hare or a rabbit. And people are like, look, you know what this means? It means that Xerxes is coming in like a mighty horse, and he's going to leave like a baby rabbit. And Xerxes is too proud to think, no, that would never be true of me. Xerxes is like, no way, that won't happen. And so Xerxes keeps marching on. He burns Athens. And at that point, this is where the Battle of Salamis and Plataea take place. They have a naval battle, and one of the few women in Xerxes' council says, hey, you don't even have to fight anymore. You don't have to fight the Greek navy. You could totally just wait them out, and then they would just beg for peace. And Xerxes ignores that, goes with the majority, and they lose the sea battle of Salamis. And some people remember Salamis. It's the sea ocean battle, because salamander, salmon, it's all ocean, so it's a sea battle. And then they have one more battle, Greece versus Persia, the Battle of Plataea. And that's like the nail in the coffin, and the Persians retreat back to Persia. And Herodotus is telling us this, showing us how Xerxes' pride led to his downfall. And notice, Persia's on the down, but who's on the ups? Greece. And so Herodotus is always telling us all the change that will happen in history. This empire that was mighty is going to fall. This empire that was small is going to rise. And that's the way history goes. The United States will not be mighty forever, what Herodotus would say. It's gonna topple at some point.
Could you go over which group attacked Sardis again?
Say again?
Okay, what people attacked and destroyed Sardis?
Okay, yeah. So this is what initially pisses off Darius. and makes him like, sire, remember the Athenians, sire, remember the Athenians. So Sardis is one of the capital cities in Persia. The Persians were not treating their, here's the worst drawing ever. I'll try to, I'm so bad at drawing. So here's Persia. Let's go, and then actually there's a little gap, and then like here's Greece. And this is like there's this Hellespont. This is all water. And then there's the Black Sea. Like here's Russia up here. And so this is this gap where they have to build a bridge. So basically, Ionia is kind of around this area, and the big idea. And so Sardis is roughly somewhere around here. So they burn this, but it's on the far edge of Persia is the big idea. It's on the left. So it's on the far edge of Persia, so much so that the Athenians and the Greeks are like, yeah, like it would be nice to weaken Persia over here. So Athens helps these people revolt, and then they light Sardis on fire. That's explosions. And that's the Ionian Rebellion. The Persians, this is actually about where Croesus, well, that's about where his empire was. And then he attacks Cyrus and loses and gets burned at the stake. So Ionia, they're enslaving their men to the Persian army, and they're kind of taxing their grains and farming heavily. And so they revolt, burn Sardis. Athens helps them. Before this, as far as I know, like Darius might not even know, may never even have heard of Persia. Sorry, totally said that wrong. Darius may never have even heard of Athens. Like Athens, what's that? Like who are these people? This is like the United States, and here's Cuba or whatever, right? Persia here's England, and here's America, right? But Persia ends up invading Greece twice and losing both times, and so Greece becomes mighty. But the Ionian Rebellion, they burn Sardis, and Darius wants to take vengeance on them, and that's what starts the Persian invasions, is punishing the Athenians for helping these people out. But they're kind of close, and that's why they help them out. So the Ionian Rebellion, as a result, Darius is like his servant every day during breakfast, lunch, and dinner while he's eating his Cookie Crisp. He's like, sire, remember the Athenians. Sire, remember the Athenians. Remember the Athenians. And then he ends up invading. Battle of Marathon. That's the first one, the first invasion. And the guy runs to Athens over here somewhere, 26.2 miles. The first marathon ever. The person dies. And then later on, Xerxes comes. And Xerxes is the 300, the 300 Spartans are trying to resist Xerxes. So wondering if timeline. So Croesus and Cyrus go together. So you could say Croesus helps Cyrus rise to power because Cyrus wins the battle. And now Persia is on the rise. Darius and Xerxes are on the rise. But Darius is pissed and he attacks Athens and he loses. And then Xerxes, his son, he's like, Daddy lost to Athens. I want to, nobody messes with my daddy. And so he attacks Athens too. And they lose at the Battle of Salamis and Plataea. And again, like overarching this is the big idea. Herodotus is telling all these stories to illustrate the dangers of pride and the fact of change in history. So it would be worth asking, what would Herodotus say about the Reformation Parliament? Would Herodotus be able to find pride and the fact of change and mutability in the Reformation Parliament? Like, that's an interesting question.
Aristotle, like on like one of the YouTube things, like on Friday, it's like you said something about how like you believe you can never have too much of it, like you're love to, but like isn't that like contradicting methods?
It's a good. I see your question. That's a good one. And so I said that Aristotle says you can never have too much virtue, but isn't that a contradiction of temperance? Because the whole point of temperance is not having ever too much of anything. The virtues, though, strictly speaking, this is a minor point. The big idea is that you want to say virtue is the golden mean. Golden mean is an important word that you guys are supposed to know for Aristotle. Virtue is the golden mean. Golden mean, it's perfect. You can never have too much of the golden mean. You can never have too much courage. You can never have too much temperance. You can never have too much wisdom. You can never, but somehow you can overshoot both of those. So you wouldn't call it too much wisdom, but you would say instead of wisdom, you have an excess. And the excess of wisdom and prudence, because prudence and wisdom is the skill of being able to choose really wisely. So if you had too much, if you somehow missed what Aristotle would say is you missed the target, you missed the golden mean, and you erred on the side. Your error was on too much of what of choosing and careful planning. He would probably say that excess, it's not called prudence or wisdom. The excess would be something like overthinking, right? Like over analysis, maybe to the point of paralysis where you think so much that you never take any action. But you wouldn't call that wisdom or prudence. You would just say the golden mean is prudence. The excess is like missing the mark on the excess side is like too much thinking and planning. And on the deficiency side, not enough thinking and planning. Somebody in another session, like not having wisdom and prudence where you miss it on the deficiency, you haven't thought very much and you've hardly planned at all. You could call that maybe you're impulsive, right? But the golden mean is perfect, just the right amount of like planning and thought to do the right choice and action. Because prudence and wisdom is skill in knowing the right thing to do, the right course of action. Yeah. Yeah, but one of the first three main questions, and the first question has like 5, let me think. It's 5 points each, 30 points. So there's maybe like 6 parts to it. And that one's actually kind of the most straightforward in terms of like spitting out facts. or stuff. If we were going to analyze temperance, because all that, like, these are related to Aristotle's ethics, because these virtues, and that you could probably apply this today too, these virtues are what humans run best on, in the same way that cars run best on gasoline and not on Slurpees. Humans run best on virtues and not on vices. And so what are the 4 cardinal virtues, which you guys had to analyze for your 44 BCE character? What are the 4 cardinal virtues?
Courage.
Courage, wisdom, prudence, justice, and temperance. And those are all, you could say, those are all the golden mean, right? And the way that relates to Aristotle is you want to make that part of your character by making it a habit for you to do just acts and making it a habit for you to be temperate with regards to pleasure, right? So when you go to lunch, you have a chance to become more temperate by not, by even like leaving a quarter of your Chick-fil-A sandwich like not eaten. And so you become a temperate, so you get to the point where theoretically on Thanksgiving and Christmas and somebody gives me a box of fudge or whatever, I just eat like 2 or 3 pieces, and I'm just savoring it. Oh, this is so good, and I don't eat more where I feel sick. And so that would be the excess of temperance, where it would be you can never have too much temperance, but if you miss the mark on temperance and you have an excess of like pleasure, then you could call that like overindulgence. Or thinking of like the Muppets, there used to be that, is it like Animal, the one who like eats everything super fast? No, Muppets. Cookie Monster works too. Cookie Monster is intemperate, not temperate. On the opposite side of that, Aristotle would say you could miss the mark on pleasure by refusing every pleasure. He thinks most of us don't have that problem. But if you refuse the mark, if you refuse every pleasure, he would say you're probably like insensitive, right? It's almost like you have no capacity for pleasure. And people are like, try this fudge, it's amazing. And you'd be like, it's horrible, I don't even like it. You'd be like, do you have no capacity for pleasure? But he thinks most of us are overindulgent, not underindulgent. But the golden mean, boom, is temperance. And you do those acts over and over and over again until it becomes part of your character, so that you're a temperate person.
So for the 3 questions, like one of them's going to be the dialogue, and is one of them about Narnia, and like the other one about like all of them?
What are the 3 questions about?
No, I'm just give us the question. Okay.
So a couple people have been in here, like in terms of the dialogue, I said there's four people that you need to have a conversation. And one of them will for sure be the Henry VIII character. And related to the Henry VIII character, like all the things that happened in the Reformation Parliament, like that's related too, right? And not stuff that you didn't do, but that would be relevant to include in the dialogue too, like your person's opinion about those things.
So about the like,
You're fine.
Like Parliament, like my character didn't like all his shoes right, and I like mentioned stuff in session 2, even though we didn't do session 2.
Yeah. The question was for people watching, if Earl of Shrewsbury, for example, who had stuff in session 2 that we didn't cover, can you mention on the final? Can you mention stuff in session 2? Would that be okay with you? Yeah. So the dialogue is 4 people. Definitely one is Henry VIII. Definitely not are Herodotus and Thucydides and Plato. So those are the examples I gave in class of the dialogue. But could be various people. I think when you see the 4 people, you'll be like, oh, yeah, that totally makes sense. There would be those 4. Catherine?
When you say y'all are gonna love this, do you mean that sarcastically or actually? Just wondering.
Last year is a little bit different final. Last year, one of the students, I walked in and she said, I'm gonna, because she was on Instagram with one of my girls. She said, I'm gonna text your daughter and tell her to put poison in your food, like during the final. And she was so pissed. I don't know. So she didn't love it.
I mean, that one person said that the song that she was putting on Mr. Ranch was for
Allie Gibb. All right, it's 12:01. Time to take a break for me.